When was the last time you looked for advice to help you move forward in life, only to find yourself stuck in the same place again and again? Maybe you followed the steps, the logic made sense, the person giving it sounded credible, maybe even successful. But for some reason, nothing really changed. You might have started thinking that the problem is with you, that you are just not capable or not meant for the life you're trying to create, that you are missing something everyone else seems to understand. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. I spent over 10 years listening to the advice of people who were smarter than me, more accomplished than me, and seemingly had it all figured out. I took their words seriously. I tried to apply everything, and I thought I was on the right track. But over time, I found myself getting more confused, more exhausted, and I felt trapped and lost. And it took me a very long time to understand that the issue wasn't the advice, and it wasn't me either. The problem was that I was following the right advice for the wrong person, at the wrong time, and in the wrong context. And that reminded me of something Carl Jung once said: "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." That line stuck with me, because it explains exactly why trying to follow someone else's blueprint feels so off. Just because it worked for them does not mean it will fit your shape, your path, or your life. So today I want to share with you some of the things I wish I had known earlier, so that you can avoid wasting years trying to live someone else's solution to a completely different problem. And by the way, if you like my no fluff, no BS, straight to the heart content, make sure to like and subscribe so we don't lose each other in the matrix. The world we live in now is overflowing with advice. Everywhere you look, there is someone telling you how to live your life, how to become successful, how to find happiness, how to be productive, how to get rich, and how to fix every single thing that's ever gone wrong in your life. You open your phone and you are instantly hit with a flood of videos, quotes, books, courses, and podcasts, all claiming to know the way. The problem is not a lack of advice. The problem is that there is too much of it. It all gets so loud that we forget to ask the most important thing, which is why we are even chasing these answers in the first place. Nietzsche said it best: "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But most of us are drowning in hows without knowing what our own why even is. And that's what makes us vulnerable to the wrong advice. We are overloaded. And in this chaos, we have started to lose the ability to ask the most basic and important question, which is not whether the advice is good or bad, but whether it actually makes sense for someone like you in the life you are currently living, with the circumstances that you are actually dealing with. That is the piece most people miss, including my younger self. And that is why so many of us feel more overwhelmed the more we learn, instead of feeling more equipped. Think about this for a second. How many times have you followed someone's recommendation, whether it was for a new movie, a restaurant, or even a city to travel to, only to find that your experience was completely different from theirs? You might even wonder how they could have liked it so much when it felt so off to you. That is because we forget something very obvious. People experience the world differently. Their background, their personality, their expectations, their values, even their mood on the day, all of that shapes their perspective. So if this is true for something as simple as watching a movie, then why wouldn't it also be true for advice that's meant to guide your whole life? When you take someone's advice, especially someone who is successful, you are not just copying their words. You are also absorbing their worldview, their upbringing, their level of emotional resilience, their privilege, and their blind spots, whether you realize it or not. But we rarely stop to ask ourselves who this person really is, where they came from, and how much of what they're saying actually applies to people who are not in their shoes. And that is how we end up following guidance that was never built for someone like us. I still remember this video I saw years ago where a guy said people should stop wasting money on rent and just live in the house their parents bought for them. I wish I was joking. That was one of the most painfully tone-deaf moments I had ever witnessed, but it wasn't an isolated case. There is also the classic financial discipline rule. Spend 30% of your salary on housing, save 30%, invest 30%, and donate the remaining 10% to charity. It sounds very noble, sounds mature and balanced, but in reality, my rent alone was already eating up 60% of my paycheck at the time. I failed before I even got to the second step. And that brings me back to something Galileo once said. You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him find it within himself. That is the core issue here. It does not matter how perfect the advice sounds if it is not connected to your actual life. If you are not in the place where that advice fits, it is just noise dressed as wisdom. And this is where a lot of good advice goes wrong. It is not that it is unrealistic. It is just not designed for someone who is barely surviving. It is built for people who are already stable, or at least people who have options. So, if you are not in that position, trying to follow that advice might actually make you feel worse, not better. It can make you feel like you are broken, when in reality, you are just trying to play a game that was rigged from the start. Instead of asking whether the advice is correct, we should be asking whether we are at a place in life where that advice would actually make sense. And if we are not, maybe the smarter thing is to first focus on getting to that place, not by copying the outcomes, but by figuring out the groundwork that made those outcomes possible in the first place. There is a quote that used to feel like gospel to me. Do not ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. It sounds beautiful and it feels empowering, but what nobody tells you is that chasing what makes you come alive can also burn you out when your reality is not built to sustain it. That brings me to the advice that nearly ruined my life. Follow your passion and the money will follow. It's one of those quotes that sounds so powerful that it practically dares you to question it. And I didn't. I believed in it with all my heart. I thought if I just kept doing what I loved, the hard work would eventually reward me. I worked harder than ever. I took financial risks. I turned down other opportunities that didn't align with my passion. I even borrowed money to keep going, telling myself it was all part of the journey. But no one tells you that following your passion is expensive. It takes time, it takes money, it drains your energy, and most importantly, it usually does not pay you, or at least not soon enough to survive. Twitter took over a decade to become profitable, and they only lasted because they had people pouring in billions along the way. I didn't have that. Most people don't. And when you are struggling just to stay afloat, believing that passion alone will save you can be one of the most dangerous traps you can fall into. A much better mindset would have been this. Find a job that causes you the least headache, but helps you pay the bills. A job that does not destroy your soul. And use that to create a foundation where your passion can grow without becoming a source of anxiety or desperation. You cannot nurture your passion if you are constantly in survival mode. Another piece of advice that gets thrown around like candy is the idea that you should always be yourself. That if people don't accept you for who you really are, then they are not worth your time. And if a workplace does not value your authentic self, you should leave. Now don't get me wrong, being authentic matters. No one wants to live a fake life, pretending to be someone they are not. But what people don't tell you is that being yourself is a privilege. Oscar Wilde once said, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." That quote gets thrown around like it is harmless. But the truth is, most people cannot afford to be their full self all the time. It is not about being fake. It is about knowing when the world can actually hold space for whom you really are, and when it might crush you for showing it. And for many of us, it is a very expensive one. The truth is that most people do not want the raw, unfiltered version of you. They want the version that makes them feel comfortable, and the world is filled with unspoken rules, social codes, and hidden expectations. If you break those rules, no matter how authentic you are, there will be consequences. You might lose a job, you might get excluded, you might get punished in ways that are subtle but very real. So instead of being told to always be yourself, we should be learning how to navigate the world in a way that lets us keep our identity without throwing ourselves under the bus. There is a difference between being honest and being reckless. There is a difference between being authentic and being naive. You have to be smart about when and where to be yourself and how much of yourself to show. You don't need to fake who you are, but sometimes you need to protect who you are so that you can survive long enough to live on your own terms. And this brings me to one final point. Most advice you hear, especially from people who are already successful, is shaped by memory loss. What I mean by that is, they have been at the top for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to struggle. They have forgotten what it's like to have no options, to start from zero, to be ignored, to be broke, to be scared. And the advice they give you now is filtered through the lens of someone who no longer has to fight those battles. Some of them never had to fight those battles at all, because they were born with things you don't have, things like money, connections, safety nets, access. And when you try to copy someone who had a completely different starting point, it messes with your head. That is exactly why Theodore Roosevelt said, "Comparison is the thief of joy." The more you try to measure your life against someone else's filtered story, the more you start forgetting what actually matters in your own. So when they say something like, just work hard, or just be confident, it sounds good, but it's missing the whole story. It skips over the part where most people are still trying to get from point A to point B, while the person giving the advice is already halfway from X to Y. And when we take that advice without questioning it, we end up lost, not because we are lazy or stupid, but because we are following a map that was drawn for someone who started the journey in a completely different place. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this. Not all advice is bad. In fact, some of it is incredibly valuable, but advice is only helpful when it matches your reality. And before you accept any advice, ask yourself whether this advice was meant for someone like you. Ask whether you are in a position to apply it. Ask what would happen if it went wrong. Ask what steps you might need to take before that advice even becomes relevant. You might come to realize that the advice is not useless, but it simply does not fit where you are at this moment, or it might never be meant for you in the first place. And honestly, that is completely fine. You do not have to follow every voice you hear. You just need to find your own. If this video helped you see things more clearly, or feel a little less alone in all the noise, then I hope you will consider subscribing to this channel. Like the video if it hit something real for you. Share it with someone who might be trapped in the same loop. And most importantly, just because a path works for someone else, that doesn't mean it's the one meant for you. Your journey has different rules. Learn them, live them, and write your own map.